It was the kind of town you don't forget, not because of its charm, but because of the things you're better off forgetting. Miller's Creek, a place so small, the air felt thick with secrets. Nothing ever happened there, at least that's what people like to say. That's how they kept going, pretending the past had stayed buried. But it hadn't. I know that now. I remember the first night I went out there. Nothing special, just a weekend getaway to clear my head. I wasn't expecting anything more than a quiet, uneventful drive through a sleepy little town. But by the time the sun set and the fog rolled in, I wished I'd stayed home. I checked into a dilapidated motel, one of those places that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. The woman behind the counter, Marlene, gave me a look that made my skin crawl, but I figured I was just being paranoid. She handed me the key with a trembling hand. "Room 3, she said in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. It wasn't until later that I realized how strange that was. She'd barely said a word to anyone else, and when I passed through the lobby, the place was empty. The room was just as run down as the rest of the place, with cracked wallpaper and a musty smell that couldn't be masked by the stale air freshener. But it had a bed and I was tired. I tossed my bag on the chair by the window and tried to relax. It didn't work. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Around midnight, I heard the first sound, the creaking. It came from the hallway, a low, groaning noise that seemed to rattle the walls. I got up to check, but there was nothing there. Just the quiet, unsettling silence of an empty hotel. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was the building settling. But the creaking came again. Louder this time, like footsteps. Slow, deliberate. They stopped just outside my door. I froze. The air was thick with tension, but I didn't move. Whoever or whatever was on the other side of that door seemed to know I was in there. Then there was a knock. Quiet at first, but then harder. Like whoever it was didn't care whether I answered or not. My heart was pounding in my chest. I told myself it was nothing, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Just ignore it. I whispered to myself, they'll go away. But they didn't. And I swear, the knocking wasn't the worst part. It was the voice that followed. "Lo, horse, come outside. It's time." I didn't move, couldn't, but I heard the footsteps retreat, fading down the hallway, and then the motel went completely silent, almost like everything had stopped. The thing is, I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every little sound made me jump, every creak of the floorboards, every shift in the air felt like it was the thing from the hallway coming back. But morning finally came, and with it, a fleeting sense of relief. I packed my things quickly, more out of a desire to leave than anything else, and headed down to the front desk. Marlene was there as expected, but she didn't seem surprised to see me. There was no "good morning," no "did you sleep well?" She just looked at me with those same, unblinking eyes and said, "Leaving already?" I nodded, trying to avoid her gaze, feeling a mix of unease and confusion. Yeah, I didn't sleep too well. Something strange happened. She didn't flinch. Her voice was barely a murmur. "Strange things happen in Miller's Creek. You won't be the last to experience it. But some things are better left alone." I felt a chill run down my spine. The way she said it, it wasn't just a warning. It was a fact. I didn't have time to ask more questions. She was already turning away, like she wanted to distance herself from whatever was happening to me. So I left. I didn't even want to stop for gas at the one convenience store in town. Not after the look I got from the clerk, who seemed to know more than she was willing to share. I drove out of Miller's Creek as fast as I could, but as the miles stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. It was like I'd left a part of myself behind in that motel, and no matter how far I went, it was still there, still waiting. And then I saw it. It was dusk when the truck appeared behind me. At first, I thought it was just another car catching up, but it didn't pass. It stayed there, just a little too close, following me in the rearview mirror like a shadow. I glanced at the road ahead, trying to focus, but every time I looked back, the truck was still there. I was getting paranoid. The road stretched on for miles, and there was nothing around but trees and darkening sky. I decided to pull off at the next rest area, just to gather my thoughts, maybe get some air. But when I stepped out of the car, I felt a strange pressure in my chest. The air felt heavier, thick with something I couldn't explain. And that's when I saw it, standing in the distance just beyond the tree line. It was a figure, tall, lanky, no face, just a dark silhouette against the twilight sky. I froze. The truck was still behind me, parked a little further down. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't stand there, not with that thing staring at me. I turned and ran back to the car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The truck was gone, but the figure was still there, unmoving, watching me. And I swear it smiled. I didn't know how long I sat there in that car, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The thing in the distance, whatever it was, wasn't moving, but it was still there, watching. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see its face. And the smile, that twisted, cold smile. It was like it knew something I didn't, couldn't stay there. The fear was suffocating. I started the engine and sped off, not caring if I was driving recklessly. I just needed to get away, as far from Miller's Creek as I could. The trees blurred past me, dark shapes in the peripheral of my vision, but I didn't look back. Couldn't. For hours I drove. No sign of the truck. No sign of anything following me. It seemed like maybe, just maybe, I was free of whatever nightmare had come from that damn town. But then, when I stopped for gas at a small station off the highway, I saw him again. The man. He was standing by the pumps, his back to me. Tall, thin, and wearing a dark jacket that looked too old for the weather. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I watched him from the corner of my eye. He didn't move, didn't turn to face me. He just stood there, as though he was waiting. I went inside, trying to act casual, but the woman behind the counter was staring at me with a look I couldn't place. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, her voice low and hesitant. "No, just passing through," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to seem nervous, but I felt like I was suffocating. She hummed, her eyes flicking toward the door. "They never really leave, you know? Not really." I didn't know what she meant, but I had a feeling I didn't want to. I paid for the gas and hurried back to my car, but the man wasn't by the pumps anymore. He was standing near the trees at the edge of the lot, still facing away from me. I drove away fast, this time making sure to glance in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Nothing. No truck. No figure. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong. The road ahead seemed endless, stretching out in the darkness. I thought about what Marlene had said, about how strange things happen in Miller's Creek. How some things were better left alone. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I was starting to get a sense of it now. Something was following me, something I couldn't escape. It wasn't just in Miller's Creek anymore. It was everywhere, and I was beginning to understand that the smile hadn't been just an image in my head. It had been a warning. I wasn't sure who or what was hunting me, but I had no doubt now. It was coming for me, and it wasn't going to stop. Not until I paid the price. The only question now was whether I could survive long enough to figure out what that price was. I tried to convince myself I was just imagining things. Maybe I'd had too much stress, too many sleepless nights. But every mile I drove, the sense of being followed crept back, always lurking just beneath the surface. And it was never in a way I could prove, just that tight, gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach like someone or something was watching me. By the time I reached the next town, I was completely on edge. I hadn't seen the man or the truck again, but I didn't trust it. Couldn't. I parked at a diner just off the main road, hoping the bright lights and bustling people would calm my nerves. It didn't work. The inside of the diner was warm, but the moment I stepped through the door, a strange stillness settled over me. The clinking of silverware, the hum of conversation. It all felt muffled, distant. The patrons didn't seem to notice me, but they were looking. All of them, just slightly, just enough for me to notice. I took a seat at the counter and ordered coffee, trying to look normal, trying to focus on anything other than the feeling creeping up my spine. But then, the door opened, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. A man walked in, the same man from the gas station. He didn't see me. He couldn't have. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, like he was on a mission, but I could feel it in my bones. He was here for me. I pretended not to notice, tried to keep my hands from trembling as I wrapped them around the coffee mug. But my mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. It just couldn't. He took a seat in the booth, his back to me. But I knew he was waiting, watching. A waitress came over to take his order, but he didn't say a word. He just pointed to the menu, and then the silence settled back in. It was like the whole diner had collectively forgotten how to speak. I glanced out the window. The street was empty. No one walking by, no cars passing. The only movement was the occasional flicker of the neon sign outside. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave. I wasn't sure what I was running from, but I couldn't sit there any longer, not with him in the same room. I left a few bills on the counter and bolted out the door, barely glancing at the man before I pushed through the entrance. I wasn't sure if he followed me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I made it to my car, my heart hammering so loudly it drowned out everything else. I threw the door open, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed it shut. I was about to start the engine when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, partially hidden by the shadows of the diner. It was him, and he wasn't alone. There were others with him now. At least 4 more, all standing in a line, all facing me. I could feel their eyes on me, their presence heavy and oppressive. They were closing in. I started the car, my hands shaking as I hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as I tore down the road, desperate to escape. But the figures didn't move. They didn't need to. I don't know how long I drove. Hours, maybe. The world outside was a blur of dark trees and empty roads. I didn't stop, didn't check the mirrors, didn't care about anything but getting as far away as possible. But then, as I passed through a curve, the headlights illuminated something in the road ahead. It was the truck, the same one from Miller's Creek. And this time, it wasn't just a truck. The headlights were off, but the engine was running, and there was someone standing in front of it. I slammed on the brakes, barely stopping in time. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The man stepped forward from the shadows. "Not so easy to escape, is it?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. I froze. And then, as if the ground beneath me cracked open, the world went black. When I woke up, I wasn't in my car anymore. The first thing I noticed was the cold, bone-chilling, the kind that sinks into your skin and doesn't leave. I tried to move, but my hands were tied, my wrists raw from struggling. The scent of wet earth and decaying leaves hit me before anything else. I couldn't see much, just shadows and faint outlines in the dim light. Took a moment for my mind to catch up, for me to realize where I was. I was in the woods. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some bad dream, some nightmarish hallucination. This was real. I had no idea how I got here or what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. I was in serious danger. Panic rose in my chest as I tested the ropes again, but they were tight. There was no way I could get free on my own. I tried to yell, but my throat felt dry and sore, like I hadn't spoken in days. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps that crunched the dry leaves on the forest floor. They were coming closer. I held my breath, trying to stay as still as possible. Whoever it was, they were not alone. The others were with him. I could hear them, low murmurs, too soft for me to make out any words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were talking, planning. Then I saw the figure. He stepped into the clearing, the same man from the diner, his face now visible in the pale light. His smile was wide, too wide, stretched across his face like something unnatural. His eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, locked onto mine, and I felt my pulse quicken. "You're awake," he said, his voice thick with something that wasn't quite amusement. "Good. We have much to discuss." I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. My heart was hammering in my chest as my eyes darted around, looking for anything that might help me escape. But the ropes were too tight, and the forest around me was a maze of trees and shadows. No signs of civilization. No way out. The man crouched in front of me, his face inches from mine. I could smell the earth on him, the rot that clung to his skin. "You think you can just drive away?" he asked, his smile never wavering. "You think you can leave Miller's Creek? That's not how it works. You're part of this now. You've always been part of this." I shook my head, desperate to understand, desperate to fight back. "What do you want from me?" My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "It's not what we want. It's what we need. What Miller's Creek needs." He stood up, turning his back to me for a moment, and when he spoke again, his tone shifted, becoming something darker. "This town, it's been waiting for someone like you. You've been marked. All those before you were, too. They came. They thought they could escape. But none of them did." I felt a cold rush wash over me. Marked? I didn't understand. Who were these people? What were they doing? What was I doing here? But then, as I turned my head, I saw them. The others. They were standing in a circle, all wearing dark, tattered clothing, their faces obscured by shadows. But I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel the weight of their presence, like 1,000 unseen hands pressing down on me. "We don't have to do this, the man said, his voice almost casual now. "You could join us. Accept your place. It would be much easier." I shook my head fiercely, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I don't want any part of this. Let me go." I screamed, struggling harder against the ropes, but the more I fought, the tighter they seemed to get. The man's smile didn't fade. Instead, it grew. It's already too late for that. And then, as the last vestiges of daylight began to fade, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't alone in this forest. There was something else here. Something older. Something darker. I wasn't just their prisoner. I was the sacrifice. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees towering like silent sentinels, blocking out the last of the fading light. I could hear the whispers now, faint but insistent. The people standing in the circle, these strangers who had been waiting for me, began to move, their heads tilted at odd angles, and their footsteps were perfectly synchronized, as if they were part of something ancient and ritualistic. I could feel it then, the shift in the air, the weight of something unnatural pressing down on me. It was more than just fear. It was like the earth itself was holding its breath. The man, the one who'd been speaking to me all this time, moved behind me, his hands gentle as they traced a line across my neck. His breath was cold against my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't just about you. It's about the town. It's about all of us." I could barely comprehend his words, too tangled in my own terror, but something inside me snapped. I couldn't just accept this. Couldn't. I yanked my arms against the ropes again, harder this time, my muscles burning with the effort. The man laughed softly, as if amused by my futile attempts. "You'll have your moment," he said, turning to face the others. "But first we need to prepare. We must remind you why you're here." That's when the chanting began. A low, guttural hum that seemed to rise from the ground itself, vibrating through my chest, rattling my bones. I felt like I was drowning in it, the sound washing over me, suffocating me. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, trying to find some clarity. But when I opened them again, the circle was no longer just a group of people. They were something else. Their faces were blurred, warped by the flickering firelight, and their eyes glowed with an unnatural, eerie light. One by one, they stepped forward, each person placing a hand on my shoulder, their fingers cold and unyielding. The touch was not human. There was something off about it, like they were trying to drain the warmth from me, trying to steal my life force. The man, now standing in front of me, bent low, his breath hot against my face. "You can't escape it. You're part of this town now. You always were. And so we will make sure you remember." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like something had pierced me from the inside. I gasped for air, my vision blurring, and the firelight seemed to distort as if the world itself was bending. The chanting grew louder, faster, each word pulling me deeper into a suffocating void. The man spoke again, his voice distorted, echoing in my ears. This town needs you. Without you, we'll all fade away, lost to the darkness. You're the key. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move, but I could feel it. The town, the curse. It was alive and it was hungry. I felt my body start to go numb, my limbs heavy, as if I was slipping away, like I was being consumed by the very ground beneath me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to fight, but the ropes were too tight, the coldness too overwhelming. And then, just as I thought I might lose myself entirely, I felt something different. A sharp crack in the air. A sudden change in the rhythm of the chant. Something had broken. A voice, different from the others, cut through the chant like a blade. Enough! The man turned, his face twisted in confusion as a figure emerged from the darkness, stepping into the clearing. The others faltered, their movements slowing as if the very presence of this new figure was enough to stop them in their tracks. The figure was tall, his silhouette sharp against the backdrop of the trees. He wore a dark jacket, his face partially obscured by the hood pulled low over his brow. "You?" the man started, his voice trembling now. "What are you doing here?" The new figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to me, his eyes cold and calculating as he took in the sight of the ritual. His gaze shifted to the others, and I saw something in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. Fear. "Leave her," the figure said, his voice low and dangerous. The man shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. She belongs to the town now. She has to." "Not anymore," the figure snapped, and in one swift motion, he drew something from his side. A knife, its blade glinting in the firelight. The group hesitated, their faces twisted in anger and confusion, but they didn't move to stop him. For a split second, I saw fear in their eyes. Then, before anyone could react, the figure lunged forward. The world went black again. But this time, it wasn't the suffocating darkness of the ritual. It was the darkness of hope. And when I woke up, I wasn't tied anymore. I was lying on the cold ground, the fire in the distance barely a flicker. The figure was gone. The others, too. Only the woods remained. But something had changed. Something inside me. I could feel it in my bones. Whatever this town was, whatever it had done to me, I wasn't part of it anymore. At least, I hoped I wasn't. But as I stumbled to my feet and looked around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure standing just beyond the trees, watching me. And in the dark, I could hear the faintest whisper. "We're never really gone." I couldn't tell how long I had been unconscious, or even how long I'd been lying there in the forest. The numbness in my limbs was fading, but the lingering dread clawed at me, as if I had never truly woken up at all. I forced myself to stand, my knees trembling beneath me. Every step I took was slow, deliberate, like I was afraid the ground itself would betray me. The figure, the one who had come to my rescue or whatever it was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had never been there, vanished as quickly as he had appeared. The silence was deafening. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees, and even that seemed wrong, too still, too careful. I wanted to run, to escape, to get as far from this cursed place as possible. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew the truth. I walked cautiously toward the edge of the clearing, the spot where I had first seen the figure standing. And that's when I saw it. A broken, weathered sign, half buried in the underbrush. It had been there the entire time, hidden in plain sight. I crouched down, brushing the dirt away, revealing the name engraved on the wood. Miller's Creek. The name didn't send chills down my spine. Not immediately. It was the words beneath it that did. Asterisk, the town that never dies. Asterisk, I stood up so quickly that I nearly lost my balance. My heart pounded, my breath quickened, and my mind spun in circles. No, this couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming. I had to be. But the forest around me was too real. The weight of the air pressing against my chest was too real. The suffocating presence, the cold bite of the wind. It was all real. I turned, instinctively, looking for a way out. But then, my eyes locked onto something. Or rather, someone. The man from the ritual. He was standing at the edge of the trees, his face partially illuminated by the fading light. You shouldn't have come back, he said, his voice cold, but his eyes. There was something different now. Something almost human. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and the words stuck. Instead, I took a step back, my heart racing again. Listen, the man continued, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. I didn't want this for you. I didn't want you to have to be part of it. But you're in the town now. You can't leave. Not really. I shook my head, my vision blurring, and I backed away from him slowly. No, I don't belong here. Yes, you do, he interrupted, his voice strangely calm now. You always did. Miller's Creek takes what it needs, and it doesn't let go. The moment you set foot here, you were marked. And you're not the first. I froze. I hadn't realized it before, but now it was clear. The feeling of being watched, the sense of something always lurking just out of sight. It wasn't just my imagination. It was the town. It was alive, waiting for me, just as it had waited for the others. We all come here, the man said, his eyes distant, because we can't escape. You can't run from it. You never could. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I could feel the weight of the words settle into my chest, heavy and suffocating. You don't have to understand, he added. You just have to accept it. It's what Miller's Creek does. It gives you no choice. I wanted to run again. I wanted to fight him, to do anything to break free from whatever this place had done to me. But the terror that had settled into my bones told me something I didn't want to admit. He was right. There was no running. Not anymore. In that moment, I understood what had happened to everyone who had ever tried to leave this place. It was never really about escaping. It was about survival. About learning to live with the darkness, the curse, the town that never dies. The man's eyes softened, almost like he was sorry for me. But there was no time for apologies in Miller's Creek. No time for anything but the truth. And the truth was this. Miller's Creek always gets what it wants. I didn't speak. Couldn't. I simply nodded, slowly, as the weight of inevitability settled over me. The man took one last step toward me, his expression unreadable. Welcome home. And with that, I knew, no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to escape, the town would always be there, waiting for the next one to be swallowed whole. It had claimed me now, and it would never let go.